I bought that old mountain place at auction, paid cash, signed the papers, felt that weird, quiet relief you get when something you wanted finally goes from idea to address. I pulled up a week later, windows dark, gravel making the same small, honest crunch it always does, and then I saw it. Fresh paint, new porch railings, a set of shoes on the mat that weren't mine. I was still turning the keys in my hand when a woman in a navy blazer and a clipboard walked out of my living room like she owned the whole ridge and said, plain as a church bell, "You don't. Call me stubborn, call me naive, call me whatever," but the first thing I did was laugh. Because who shows up to their own house and gets told it's someone else's? She didn't laugh. She introduced herself as Marion Holt, president of the Redwood Hollow Homeowners Association, and she smiled like someone who'd rehearsed forgiveness and won't actually give it. "There's been a management agreement," she said, tapping the clipboard in that way people do when they want to make a stamp of authority. "The tenants were placed here under contract. Eviction would be avoidable if you file the right forms." That was the hook. Me next 60 seconds turned into the first scene of everything that followed. The tenants, two young people with tired faces and a baby stroller out on the porch, insisted they had leases. Marion slid a glossy packet across a folding table like evidence in a courtroom TV show. I looked at the stack, at the official-sounding names: Clearfield Trust, an assignment, an arbitration clause that sounded like it belonged in a bank vault, and felt that slow, rising heat that tells you are being boxed in. I could have done the easy thing. Walk away, sign a paper, pocket the money, let the house remain a nuisance. But this place had been a long cemented part of my Plinto me. It was more than timber and nails. It was a piece of the life I'd been trying to build. So I did the stupid brave thing. I called the county. Paper trails are funny like that. They don't care about speeches or bluffs. The county recorder's office had my deed stamped and sealed, me name, my lot number, my late-night signature. Marion's packet? Beautiful, but it didn't match the overlays in our public records. That was when the game changed. If Act 1 is discovery, Act 2 is stubbornness turned methodical. I sat with a retired surveyor named Hank Porter in a diner that smelled like frying oil and coffee and legal history. Hank pushed the old plats across the table with a thumb that had seen 90 winters and said, "Someone redrew the lines." Not with a pencil, he meant digitally, surgically. An overlay map in Marion's packet ended up being a near-perfect forgery. Signatures where there should have been margins, stamps that stopped 1 pixel short of authenticity. Hank squinted, tapped, and shook his head slow enough to mean trouble. We found a pattern. Clearfield Trust wasn't just a name on paper. It was a conduit. People in tone, an ex-postmaster who'd watched parcel transfers, a woman who used to work at the title company and ate too many cookies at town meetings started telling me stories. They hit the old folks first, the postmaster said. Then the houses that sat empty. One man in a truck described how crews showed up overnight, painted, fixed the roof, slipped in tenants with phony leases, then quietly pushed for assessments and insurance claims. It smelled like a business model built on confusion. My lawyer, Maya Torres, is a kind of person I'd been lucky enough to meet: sharp, impatient with nonsense, the kind of lawyer who thinks paperwork is a boxing glove. She filed notices, subpoenas, requests for inspections. Marion responded with arbitration clauses and threats. "We will pursue sanctions," she warned in an email that was more a threat than punctuation. The county sheriff shrugged his shoulders and told me the law is a slow animal. Property disputes can take seasons. Maya looked at him like he'd suggested taking a snail to a gunfight and scheduled a hearing anyway. The middle of the story needed more than legalese. It needed a public mirror. We called reporters. The first article was a chorus of questions: who owns what, and why does the HOA have the audacity to place people in a house that's in someone else's name? A camera crew showed up at my driveway and filmed the way the sun set off the new porch railings. Marion's smile didn't soften for the camera. If anything, she learned how to hold it like armor. The courtroom sequence the way I remember it in my head was all heavy doors and louder murmurs, the judge's voice like gravel. Marion's counsel was practiced, sure-footed, like someone who'd played this scene before. They argued about jurisdiction and municipal code and a trust document handwritten so neatly you'd swear it was printed. Then Hank took the stand and held up a printout. Overlays showing digital manipulation, metadata proving the map had been altered after the county's official scan date. You could feel the change in the room. It's one thing to argue numbers. It's another to watch the numbers wink and their lights go out. It didn't end in a cinematic exhale. The DA opened an inquiry after a whistleblower, a former property manager from one of the shell companies, came forward with emails showing a pattern: coordinated placement of tenants, forged signatures, falsified affidavits to get quick code enforcement actions. That is when Marion looked smaller, and when she lashed out, she did it with the only weapon left to her people. She called neighbors. She called meetings. She said the homeowners' funds had to be protected. She warned of outsiders who would erode property values. There were rallies in the community center where donuts and coffee were handed out with pamphlets that had bold headlines and very little truth. The emotional core of Act 2, though, was between me and Marion in a porch confrontation the night before the preliminary ruling. It was raining, the kind of rain that washes everything clean if you're lucky. She stood there with her clipboard soaked, hair stuck to her temple, and said, "You don't understand how much this neighborhood needs rules." I answered, "I understand enough to know rules are not an excuse for theft." She smiled, thin, a small, precise smile. "The rules are all that's left for people who can't take things the right way," she said. I remember thinking, there's cruelty disguised as civility, and then there's the bankrupt kind that says it for you. The judge's ruling was partial at first, procedural in tone, but clear enough. Freeze on any demolition, provide all original documents, and no further tenant placements. That was a win that felt like a scraped knee, painful, but survivable. It unleashed the final push. The DA's criminal inquiry paired with the county's audit, and Marion's allies began to look like people with too much to lose rather than righteous defenders. Subpoenas were served. There were late-night phone calls that became recorded statements. The trust that had been so glossy on paper started to crumble at the edges. In the climax, because every good story finds its apex when the stakes are at their loudest, Marion was escorted out of a community meeting by officers after a search turned up forged documents and wire transfers that didn't add up. She looked at me from across the foyer, and her face was not the same. There was anger, yes, but mostly the surprise of someone who never quite believed that the system could hit back. The courtroom finalized things with a judgment that invalidated the trust's claim to my parcel, awarded damages for trespass and legal fees, and ordered oversight of the HOA's finances. The machine of paper and polished speeches had been jammed. But stories don't end on tidy court orders. The last act was a small Tina community potluck on my reclaimed lawn where neighbors brought potato salad and awkward apologies. A man who'd signed a petition against me hugged my shoulder and said, quietly, "We didn't know." The baby stroller that had been on my porch months earlier rolled by again, someone else pushing, and I felt the ordinary miracle of it. Life keeps moving, and sometimes justice follows, but not always in the way you thought it would. I left the final scene with a camera still rolling and a question that sits heavy in my chest: what happens when the people who swear to organize a community use that organizing to take advantage? I've seen the human motivations up close. Fear of change, hunger for control, the comfort money can buy when you're careful with paper. I've also seen courage: an old surveyor who kept his binder, a whistleblower who chose consequences over comfort, and a lawyer who refused to let legal language be a weapon for thieves. So here's what I want to know from you, because a story like this means nothing without the conversations it sparks. Do you think the HOA system needs a hard reset, tighter audits, or more transparency? Or do you think it's just a few rotten apples in a bin that's mostly fine? Drop a comment with what you'd do if you woke up and someone else had repainted your porch, or tell me if you've ever seen community rules weaponized. If this stirred something, anger, relief, curiosity, share it, because stories like this only get better when we untangle them together. If you liked hearing this, smash that like button or subscribe for more real-life fights that feel like small-scale epics every town has won. And if you have a story about property, power, or a neighbor that turned into a headline, put it in the comments. I'll read, and maybe, just maybe, use it as the beginning of the next one.